Okay, good afternoon. How are you today?
Good.
Good. Well, welcome to the MLAC Subcommittee for Average Weekly Wage. We are here to review some of the additional data that we received on claims and then potentially go into policy discussion around the original bill 705-2 that actually spurred the subcommittee work. Co-chair Scott Strickland is also here with us. I don't know if Scott has any opening remarks, but if not, we'll turn it back over to Terry.
Happy to let Terry take it away.
Perfect. Me too.
Alrighty then. Well, I am going to pass it over to Administrator Matt West, and he is going to share some information on data of claims and short and long-term disability insurance. So over to Matt.
All right, thank you, co-chairs. So Matt West, Administrator Workers' Comp Division. Here to provide a couple of data points that were requested. The first is something we provided to the full MLAC committee back earlier this session, but so much has happened and so many things have been shared. We figured we'd bring it back to the forefront. So the data, the question on income brackets, kind of the income for injured workers. So the data in this chart are accepted disabling claims that were reported to the division in 2024. And then we broke down, our research team broke down those claims by income bracket. So you can see in their $20,000 range. So under 30,000 is that first line, and then 30 to 50, 50 to 70. So it kind of gives you an idea of the number of claims. The majority fall between the 30 and 50,000 claim, or the biggest chunk. The biggest chunk. And if you look at the next page, which Bob was going to scroll to, it shows it in a pie chart. So you can see that 41% were in that $30,000 to $50,000 a year range. 23% in the 50 to 70, 10% in the 70 to 90. So anyway, so that's the data that we had shared previously. Just wanted to bring it back for that, for your, to be at top of mind. And so you have that. Any questions on that before I move to the temporary disability?
All this information is on our website, the subcommittee website as well. So
Yeah, I remember the links to this, and I do remember the presentation, and I thank you for bringing this up. Just as a refresher for folks, state average weekly wage is just a hair under 70,000. Is that correct? That's the threshold, just for discussion as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so moving on to the last page of this particular memo. So we were asked if we could come up with a way to show the duration, essentially like how many days on average or whatever that people are out on receiving temporary disability benefits. So the way that the data is reported to the division, when an insurer closes a claim, they just report the amount and the duration of temporary disability. So they'll just say from this period to this period, here's how much was paid. When they report that, they split that off between temporary total disability and then what's called temporary partial disability. So temporary partial disabilities, a worker can be, they could either be off completely, or they might be working reduced hours, or they could be working their full hours, but the light duty job doesn't pay them the same. And so there would be some temporary partial disability payment to make up for that gap. So the way that we were able to, we took the number of weeks that the insurer reported to us on the notice of closure, divided it by 7 to come up with a number of days. In this data, it's accepted disabling claims only. We no denied claims are in this data set. And you'll see a large difference between the average numbers and the median numbers. And that's, caused by a relatively smaller number of claims that maybe have a long period of temporary disability. So it pulls that average to, kind of skews it. And the median is, kind of that right in the middle. So if we had, not to do a statistics class, I asked our research folks to help break it, help me understand in case I was asked. And they said, if there's 5 of us in this room and then Phil Knight comes into the room and we're talking about average income, we all just became millionaires on average, even though we're not. So that's where like a high number can skew that average. So we feel like the median numbers are closer to kind of what's typical for most claims. And so again, in the chart, it's by year, total number of claims, and then you can see like 2024, for example, the median days were 10 on it, and then the average days were a little higher at 30. So, but yeah, happy to answer any questions related to this. And I know we have our research team on it if we get too far outside of my wheelhouse.
This is great data. Thank you. Appreciate you bringing that back to us again. Thank you.
Great. Well, if there are no questions related to that, at this point, I can move to the second request for information we received. So there was some question on kind of short-term and long-term disability policies. And so we worked with our partners up in DFR, Department of Financial Regulation, and just got some information on short-term and long-term disabilities. The majority of policies have some sort of waiting period. So this is just information for you. There are typically maximum benefit durations and limits. There's some deductible income provisions. So if you're receiving like paid leave and you apply and you have a short-term disability policy, it will typically offset. For what it's worth, workers' compensation benefits are also deductible income. So if somebody's on workers' comp and then has a short-term disability policy, they would offset that. So there isn't like a set minimum or maximum. Short-term disabilities typically range from 40 to 60% of the employee's income, and then long-term disability policies are typically a little higher, between 60 and 66%. There are no real rules or statutes that regulate how much that would be. It's an insurance policy that an employer's purchasing or providing to their employees, and so there's, I think, some negotiation that may go on what type of policy that they want to offer theirs. So that's the information that we have on short-term and long-term disability. Again, not experts, but we could try to answer some questions, or if you have any specifics, we can take them back to our partners up in DFR if there are specific questions. Then we were also, just for what it's worth, we were also asked earlier this week just about paid leave organs specifically and what their benefit levels are, what rate they use. And our team's looking into that. We don't have that data yet. Once we have that, we'll make sure to send that out.
That's great. Thank you. Scott, do you have any questions or any questions from the gallery?
So I guess the question that I would have too is there someone that could explain the process for a worker who goes on short-term disability?
We can find someone. I'm sure we have folks that can.
I don't think we have
Help
anybody
explain
on the
that.
call right now. I don't think DFR is on the call, Co-Chair. I can ask somebody. I personally have not used short-term disability before. So, or long-term disability for that. But that's something we could have maybe DFR.
Yeah, we may have that. They'll likely have contacts with maybe like a short-term, long-term disability insurer who can come and talk about their process.
Yeah, and I think that'd be helpful. And I know a lot of the answer from that, it sounds like, is it depends, or kind of market determination on that, depending on the policy or the language. But I didn't know too. I see Barb has raised her hand. I know that she would have some experiences. I don't know if there's other stakeholders that can kind of fill in on that. I know we have insurers, and I thought I saw Keith and maybe another attorney and other folks. So just sort of curious about that.
I was actually wanting some clarification on what you mean. Are you wondering how? I guess I want to know what your question really was relating to short-term disability and workers' comp.
So I would just say, to kind of generally procedurally, part of the discussion that we're having here is the idea of, is there kind of sufficient benefits? Is there any deterrence for people to file claims or continue claims because they're not making enough under what work comp is providing? I know that some folks, probably not as many low income folks, which is kind of seems where we're having the discussion centered. But that some folks do have access to short-term disability. And I know it looks like in here there's a sort of an offset for that income. So I didn't know if somebody had access to short-term disability or another form of insurance that may be paid out higher, if they're, what that would look like in terms of maybe somebody starts a claim, finds out they're not making enough under work comp, they then sort of, either refuse to file or refuse to engage directly, or can kind of continue the claim and instead prefer insurance, or if there's, any kind of information about that, just sort of from an injured worker perspective.
Okay, that helps. I just wasn't quite sure where you were going with that, but I'm sure there are people on the call that can speak more to that than myself. I mean, we get a lot of the calls on whether or not they're going to apply for paid leave versus workers' comp, but I'm not familiar or don't have much exposure to the other. My staff probably do, but I'd be interested to hear about the other folks on the call.
Mr. Lawrence, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so Matt Lawrence, I'm an attorney with PSD Law out of McMinnville. I represent injured workers. Prior used to work on the other side, representing insurers and cities, counties, etc. I can speak in generalities to this. When someone has, really the systems don't run concurrent, I can say Oregon paid leave will not pay out when somebody's on a workers' compensation claim. It's one of the boxes that you check. And even when a claim is denied, many times they will hold benefits until the litigation is settled. And then each short-term disability plan is going to be contract dependent. It's going to be based off of what you've purchased, what your company has purchased. And most times they either don't run concurrent or they're going to offset. I don't remember, and I can look into it and get you the answer for who's going to be the primary payer. I believe workers' compensation becomes primary payer and will offset, or excuse me, short-term may be the primary payer and workers' comp will offset based off of that. But I can get that exact for you. But it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be contract dependent, but I believe there is going to be an offset. So you're not going to be able to double dip. You're not going to be able to collect both at the same time.
Great, thanks. That was kind of going to be one of my follow-up questions is that the availability of short and long-term disability with low work comp rates, does that sort of undermine the concept of the exclusive remedy in this sense, because you have people sort of diverting to a private insurance model?
Any other comments or questions from the group?
It looks like there's a few hands up for Tice and Keith.
Perfect. Let's start with Tice.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I'm having some camera issues today. I just wanted to say from the work comp processing standpoint, we do have a number of employers who have as a part of their contracts with their short-term and long-term disability that workers who are on workers' comp leave receiving those benefits then also get supplemental benefits through those short-term and long-term disability plans. But again, it is all by contract on their end. And in those cases, we don't offset on the work comp side. They get the benefit that they're due as a part of the claim. The short-term and or long-term disability then just fills in that gap from their policy.
Perfect, thank you. Keith, do you still have a question?
Just a comment, thank you. Yeah, my experience has been that workers' comp doesn't offset the long-term disability short-term benefits, but long-term, short-term definitely offsets the workers' comp benefits. The vast majority of the policies say that they're second in line. Some run concurrently, but not very many. So it's really important for the worker to know that they're not allowed to collect both benefits and to report that. Otherwise, I've seen overpayments. Sometimes I've had workers who had a hard time getting the short term to stop sending them checks, even though they were reporting comp income. So it's kind of a trap for the worker in some cases.
Thank you. What is the taxable income what is taxable through short-term, long-term disability? I believe if it's employer paid, it's taxable, but if it's employee paid, it's not. That's my assumption, but would love someone to tell me if that's correct or not. And then worker comp, is that taxable? I don't believe it is, but would like to know that too. If anyone has those answers. Mike, looks like your hand's up.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer for that, but I did have a question on the double dipping issue. So we have seen instances where an employer will tell a employee that they have applied for and been denied a workers' comp claim when they haven't filled out their own form even. And my concern is what will I don't want them to assume that that's going to get them in trouble if they then try to file a disability, a short-term disability claim. And how can we parse that? How can we separate that to make sure that that workers aren't being convinced against filing claims in that manner? I guess is my question.
I was going to go ahead and speak from the Ombuds standpoint. That is something we've had concerns about and have heard stories of, where workers will call us months later and say, what's going on with my claim? I don't know who my insurance company is, and my employer told me they filed, but that it was canceled, or that they told me they filed, but they never did. We find no record of it, or that the employer is telling them we filed and it's been and we denied it. And lots of times the workers don't have any idea whether that's a legit thing or not. So, I think all we can do, at least from our standpoint, and is education, because I think workers don't know what they don't know. So we just really tried to educate employers, because I think sometimes the employers, they don't actually know anything about workers' comp. They don't even know they're supposed to file any paperwork or whatever. So some of it might be ignorant, some of it might be a little worse than that. But I think education is the best piece of it, the best part.
Thanks, Barb. Lamar?
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I think my first one actually is going back to the data that was presented, especially like around the total disability. Like it does look like there, in general, just overarching, like since 2014, looked like there was a decline in like how long someone was out. But like looked like both on the average, but maybe not so much on the median, but still somewhat of a decline. And so I guess my question is like, from your knowledge, and anyone can answer this, from your knowledge, like what's driving that? And then just to follow up on that, it's I do have a question on kind of like, like what are the factors from that possible decline, can we address through this process? But I'll, first start with the first one.
Yeah, thanks, Lamar. My understanding, and we have our data folks on the call, so they can correct me if I'm wrong, is the 2024, 2023, like that data is not as mature, since there could be claims that have been filed in 2024 that haven't closed yet. So those claims, which are longer period claims, wouldn't be included in the data set, because they're not included until a notice of closure is issued. That's my understanding of why some of the later years it seems lower, or it is lower. The data is just not quite as mature.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly why that it is. And the reason that the median is kind of consistent and the mean is, that idea that those larger claims are really driving the mean to the right, so higher. And for years going back, there have just been longer for there to be a few claims that have gotten like particularly long, with, many, many days that are really pulling the mean a lot higher than the median, which is why I think the mean isn't a great indicator of like the actual like central tendency for this measure. I think the median is probably the most useful indicator of that. But yeah, it's a good question, and that definitely is a trend that's happening. And I think if you went even further back, you'd see the mean goes even higher and higher.
Thanks, Andrew. And Andrew is our, as you probably figured out, the researcher who, the brains behind all of this. So thanks, Andrew.
Yeah,
No problem.
Thank you so much. To the co-chairs, could I have a follow-up if that's okay? Okay, so and this could be to matter for anyone who is directly like engaged with folks who are kind of going through the system from what we currently have in terms of 66 and 2/3 being the payout, and the goal of workers' comp being that we want to make sure that we're able to support the person that was injured and their dependents. Do you see any correlation between like some of that data and then like maybe inflation or what have you, kind of like getting folks back to work earlier or before they need to continue to make ends meet? And so uh, again, for anyone, but I think that's like one of my concerns looking at the data.
Well, I know within the construction industry, from the employer side, there's definitely a push to get people back to work sooner, bringing them on, having more modified duties, engaging them in maybe some work that wouldn't be typical of their normal position, but getting a temporary position assigned to them. And so I do know that, for instance, from my employer standpoint, there's definitely a push wanting to get people back into the workforce. I think studies have shown that when people are engaged back in the workforce sooner, they tend to heal faster. They just get back into the groove of life a lot faster, and it's beneficial for the employee and the employer both. Everyone benefits from that, is some of the information that I've read about it. And so our company absolutely is trying to get people engaged as soon as they can be and back to work. I think that is a trend that we're seeing in the industry. Obviously, I can't speak for all industries, but I do know specifically for construction, we are seeing that, and that's a great benefit. And hopefully that continues. Now I see Barb's hand up. Scott, I don't know from your position if you agree with that sentiment or if you're seeing something different.
Scott, did you want to respond to her? Or?
I can, but go ahead, Barb.
Oh, I think I was coming from I think I was either misunderstanding the question or coming from a different angle where we do see workers, we do hear from workers that do end up actually going back to work earlier than they should be because they can't afford to support their families, or situations where they're getting their time loss and stuff, but because of the level of time loss, it does not provide them the same level of support that their income did. They're wanting to go out and do like Uber or do the deliver the whatever all the Uber things, DoorDash and stuff. So but they kind of are met with the barrier there too, because if they go out and do that, then they have to report it and their time loss is low, can be offset. And so it's really kind of a balancing act. But yeah, we definitely hear from workers saying, well, I had to go back to work. I couldn't pay my bills. I'm getting sent to the creditors. I couldn't pay. I've got one now who's living in her car. So definitely something we see. So I don't know if that's what you were going after, Lamar, but that's where my mind went when you started talking about it. So.
Yeah, and I think I would agree, kind of to follow up on the question. I think there is a lot of data, there's a lot of research that shows that kind of getting back to normal as soon as you can is good in a mental health perspective, which in the construction industry is a critical health crisis currently as well. I can say that in my experience, there was a push to get me back to work too early, and I was actually put on light duty and then removed and put back on full disability. And part of that had to do with an enrollment with an MCO that then kicked me off receiving the care that I was receiving from a provider, and there was a wait list, and then I kind of, started to get better and then got worse, and then when I was able to get back with the provider, it sort of got up until I'm now, medically stationary and in chronic pain for the rest of my life. But I think that, yes, I understand that there is a value to getting folks back within sort of the support network and work and whatnot. I do worry that there is too hard a push towards that, and especially given, as Lamar had mentioned, the inflationary concerns specifically around housing and childcare that aren't exactly captured by CPI the same way that other costs are. That again, there's a sort of huge disincentive to workers to continuing claims, and partially a cultural push, partially perhaps predominantly a financial push to get them back to work too early, that then puts them in a situation where they're not actually recovering to the full extent they could, understanding that they may never, such as myself, may never fully recover from that injury. But I know a lot of other hands shot up, and happy to hear from other folks.
Yeah, looks like Matt, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, and I'm sure Keith's going to have similar experiences to me, but I think what Scott just said is exactly right. A lot of times workers will come to me, my clients, they'll ask me, can I go back to work? Can I ask my doctor to release me? My advice is always, listen to your doctor. Your doctor's really the one that should be in charge here, not you. But they can't afford it. They just can't, they can't keep living. They can't pay their rent. And when it comes to that, they're going to put their financial needs over their medical needs. And it's a situation that does usually end up with them going back out on full term, off work. Another point, I 100% agree. Modified duty is a fantastic thing. I try to get my clients back to work as fast as possible because it does. It gets them healthy. It gets them better. But a lot of industries don't offer modified duty. And there are actually really good legal reasons not to for long term, because the modified job could eventually become considered the permanent job. And there's a lot of crossover, but a lot of companies have a limited modified duty time that they're going to allow. And we see that when that time runs out, a lot of times workers are pushing their doctors to get released back to regular work, so they're not losing their healthcare benefits, their 401k benefits, all these other benefits. So, while we agree, we want our workers to work modified duty. I want my clients to get better faster. Sometimes it's really not in our hands. It's in the doctor's hands, and it's in the employer's hands. So that's just something else I think we need to consider.
Absolutely agree. Keith, you have a comment?
Yeah, Keith Simple. I think part of the question was whether it's getting more difficult for workers, and it absolutely is. I would say the low income workers are the ones that are definitely struggling the most when they go on to the time loss. Workers with dependents, workers who have, we just heard about, 401ks and things like that, but health insurance benefits is a big one. When workers lose those in the course of the claim, that can really make a dent and make it hard for their family. Some workers have all three of those situations going on. I definitely have had clients that have, lost their housing in the course of the claim, and there's a lot of difficulty out there. I did think that some states have adjusted for that, maybe in the lower incomes, or taken the number of dependents into account. I do think that definitely kind of a solution here targeted at the lowest income workers, ones with dependents, ones that lose their health insurance would be a great thing.
Thanks, Keith. Any other comments? I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
This is a great discussion.
Agree. Let's see. Does anyone online know the taxable piece to the various benefits, whether it's worker comp or short-term or long-term disability?
This is Keith. I'll jump back in. Workers' comp isn't taxable, but I think long-term, short-term is. Unemployment is. Sometimes workers will go on unemployment if their claim benefits are denied. Unemployment is taxable. My clients remind me of that. And then if we prevail, we can't put that money back. So workers' comp gets an offset, and then they don't have to pay. We have to report the unemployment, and the client just has to take the unemployment since it's already been taken. Interesting fact, you didn't ask for that, but
No,
another
great to
piece
know.
of the overlap that we're kind of talking about here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, thanks for confirming my understanding on the worker comp and the term, short-term, long-term disability. Nat.
Yeah, I actually sat on a CLE, one of our continued learning education things about exactly this and settlements, what's taxable and not. I have a handout somewhere. I would love to share it with you guys if possible. I'll
That'd be
dig through
great.
my emails, but the Oregon State Bar put on a CLE with the tax law section, and they kind of educated us on this. And I think you're exactly right with long term. It all depends on if you pay for it, if you get taxed on the benefit up front versus, so it's going to be completely different for each individual person.
Yeah, but I think if someone has a standard employer policy, odds are that they're not contributing to it, so it's probably going to be taxed, would be my assumption. Again, case by case basis, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of them are kind of an employer benefits. They're probably treated more in that realm. So
Yeah, but I'll dig through my emails and see if the bar still
awesome.
has that handout, and we can kind of look at that.
Love it. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Great discussion, everyone. Appreciate it. Okay, Scott, any thoughts on your end?
No, I think good discussion, and I know Terry, you're the clearinghouse for submission. I know we had something great from I think Thais sent in an example, so would love Matt to forward that to Terry.
Absolutely. All right, Terry, kicking it back to you, ma'am.
Okay, so it looks like the next thing we have is policy discussion. We have been talking about average weekly wage for low-income workers, but we also have on the agenda Senate Bill 705 and the -2 amendment. Are we ready to move there?
I think so. I don't see any other discussion. So yeah, let's head that way.
Okay. Do you have that? Yeah, would you like that on the screen, Co-Chair?
Yes, please. I think that'd be great. And so just as a reminder for everyone, this is the bill that MLAC reviewed, and we had decided that we thought it would be best to come to the subcommittee for work. And so that's why we are all here together. It was the origination of this bill, and just looking at what some of the work needed may be to this issue, for better understanding, and also looking for a solution that seems reasonable for the situation. Yeah, sorry, Terry. No, go ahead.
Lamar is here from ASME, and he can, if he wants to talk about it.
That would be great. Would love an expert to talk about it. You're up, Lamar.
Sure. Yeah, and filling in for Odalise, who is out for a couple weeks. But yeah, my name is Lamar Wise. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the political director for Oregon AFSCME. I guess for folks who may not know, this is something that we've been interested in for a while, and have a ton of members who have come up and really talk through like some of their issues with workers' comp, and getting back to kind of the discussion that we just had around their lack of ability to be able to actually support their family, while dealing with an injury from work, whether that be, an assault, or whether it be an equipment issue or what have you, that maybe they lost a finger or whatever it is, it has become increasingly difficult for the members who have reported to us to afford to even be on a workers' comp. And so, we came up with this policy. I think, the original idea was to increase the amount of wage replacement for this, so that so the folks could get the highest amount of wage replacement possible, so that they could do what they needed to do to heal and still take care of their family and then get back. Um, our viewpoint has been, and I think this was also said earlier, but our viewpoint has always been that the doctor has the discretion and the knowledge to advise on whether or not a worker is ready to go back into the workforce, and at what level as well. And so, under that guise, and as well under the guise of, the um, purpose of workers' comp is to, make sure that the person that was hurt is able to uh, live off of that, but also their dependents. We thought that this really needed to be looked at, and so I think under the original. I think under the original 705 bill, we had it at I think looking at it, yeah, it looks at 100%. Obviously, that was kind of discussion about that, and also take into consideration some of the tax implications that could happen when we're doing full wage replacement. I think we hear that, and we wanted to kind of have more of a conversation about, well, what like what is that number? Because what we do know is that a 66 and 2/3 currently is not working, and want to make some meaningful progress towards increasing that to the number, especially for the low income folks that we saw are taking up the lion's share of usage. We want to make sure that those folks are that we're not building a system that that will continue to uh, benefit just folks that are higher income, but we're really looking at making sure that we're protecting some of the most vulnerable workers and Oregonians through the system. So that's kind of the basis, and the why, but happy to answer the questions that I can. And also, I know we have folks that represent labor or clients on here that I'm sure could weigh in as well. And but yeah.
Lamar, would you
Thanks,
like
Red.
the -2? Sorry, Co-Chair. Would you like the -2 to be placed? This is the original bill, but we do have the -2 as well.
Yeah, maybe let's start there. I think that's
And am I recalling correctly, the -2, I think reduced that to 80%? Is that right, Lamar? I'm trying to remember the details of that.
yeah, this is my record.
I have the analysis that our policy analyst did on that, but yeah, it was the -2 would have a worker would receive 80% of the wages equal to or less than the state's average weekly wage, and then 66 and 2/3 for any wages above the state's average weekly wage. That was
There you
the
go.
wording in the -2. Yeah, there you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Lamar, I would love to just get your opinion on, as we've been looking at the research the past few weeks or month or so on this, the number of dependents has come up. Some of the other states that we've seen where there's been a scaling percentage based on income. My desire, wherever we land, is that we keep it simple. I'm wondering, what is your thought, or do you have, since you are very close to this, what is your thought on the number dependent tactic or philosophy, and just trying to figure out that framework for what that looks like going forward? Any thoughts there at all? And I know I'm putting you totally on the spot, but just wondering if you've given it any consideration.
I think we also lean towards wanting to make sure that this is as simple as possible, because, I think in a lot of these conversations, we also know that it's already, a complicated system. And so anything that we change will have ripple effects on how intake happens, especially for like on the lawyer side, right? Like we want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible because we don't want to create any additional barriers that would um, have unintended consequences, and therefore, not, prevent folks from getting their benefit. With that being said, though, I mean, yeah, I think we're open to consideration of with a formula with dependents. I do think that generally, though, the base percentage, needs to increase, especially for low income folks. And then on top of that, we tried to kind of construct a tiered out policy um, based on folks's wages and tax brackets, and that just got super messy and super complicated real quick. And we tried like twice, like real hard, but I think it does start to really complicate, and you know it would just make it very difficult to explain. And then some of the formulas I think even came out just like a bit weird. So yeah, so I think we are interested in still figure out what is the highest amount that we could get to without coming into uh, uh, tax complications as well. I see Mike's hand up, so I'll stop talking.
Makes sense. Thank you. Mike.
Um, feel free to keep talking, Lamar, because I just want to echo what Lamar's been saying and point out from our perspective when we're looking at the 50,000-foot view. The whole point of this program is that this is in lieu of a cause of action by the employee, and so anything that results in a scenario in which an employee is incentivized to go back to work more quickly than a doctor recommends, or is having difficulty, replacing their income, is at its core insufficient. And I know we've got a lot of ways to get there. I know that that's not going to happen overnight, but in terms of what our North Star is in this situation, I just want to be absolutely clear that when we have to explain to a employee that they don't have a cause of action, we want to be able to explain also that it's because we have this agreement whereby they are going to be made whole, not partially whole, not kind of whole, but whole. That's where we're aiming at. That's our destination here.
Thanks, Mike. Any other comments from folks? Any other questions about the initial bill itself or the -2 bill itself?
Well, and just to catch some folks up to speed, I know the AFSCME team, I think, did kind of in crafting the legislation, heard some of the discussions that we'd had in full committee about wanting to have that sort of link to tax, sort of an after tax, and concerns about benefits and deductions and everything else. I think made it a valiant attempt at coming forward with a bill that addressed that. I think then there was some kind of subsequent concern about that and some pushback of, it's work comp. There's always a rabbit hole or 8 that you fall down in the process. And I think that, that as that occurred, I feel like the transition to the -2 is where there started to be some more alignment on that model with the buckets. And I know that we've had stakeholders within the subcommittee testify, sort of saying, please, whatever you do, keep the way that the average weekly wage is calculated and the before tax calculation the same. You can, adjust or play with either buckets or percentages, but don't throw the throw the entire system out to remake it, given the rulemaking and everything else that's gone through that. So I think, again, just kind of reiterating that as a summary of a lot of the criticism through the process, constructive and whatnot that it may be, as to sort of where this has landed. And from what I'm hearing, the trajectory is to kind of continue in that -2 vein, and that there wouldn't be a sort of a backwards push or going back to that original. So I think as we kind of center our discussion and debate around the policy behind that and the costs and everything else, that we can kind of hone in on that -2 and see where that plays. I know we're kind of starting to get some of that work done, and then it seemed like just ran out of time, which is why the subcommittee was formed, and we could move forward on that. Again, not too much of a history lesson, but I wanted to make sure we had that kind of all encapsulated as we move forward on this critically important work, echoing the reasons why Lamar and Mike have brought up this as such a critical issue.
Looks like Kirsten has her hand up.
Hi, everyone. Kirsten Adams with Associated General Contractors. First of all, very grateful for the conversation and the space to be kind of working through this really complicated issue. And excuse me, one thing that I just kind of wanted to flag as I'm listening to kind of what our intentions are on this is, we're all very aware of how complicated workers' comp is, and that there's no two cases that are the same. So I think one thing that's going to be a challenge, but something that we're just going to have to acknowledge going as we're working on this, is that there is not going to be a perfect solution that's going to bring everybody to the exact amount. I think without getting to the point where it's too complicated for it to work for the system. So I think, as we're looking at this, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So I think we want to try and find a system and a way to handle and calculate in such a way that it brings as many people to the right level as possible, knowing that in a system as broad as workers' comp, we're never going to be able to get every single piece. So I think, it's one thing just to have at the front of our minds, I think, is that we need to come up with the best possible solution, but that in a system that's as diverse as workers' comp, we're unlikely to be able to find something that is the silver bullet for everything. But I appreciate the steps forward we're taking with starting with the -2 and looking towards how we can structure this so as many people are getting the benefits that they need, and being able to make the decision based on their doctor as opposed to finances to go back to work and all that. So I think that's a really important goal, and I just wanted to flag that we should try as hard as we can to get it as perfect as possible, but knowing that in a system like this, there is no way to get it to a point where everybody is it covers every possible eventuality. So
Yeah, great point, Kirsten. Totally agree. I think the piece, as I've looked at this, that I've wrestled with is just trying to understand averages, which the data we're getting from our partners is informing us of this. But everyone has a different tax situation. You could have a worker who on their own would be low income, but perhaps their spouse has a high paying job, and so every situation is a little different. And so I think, to Kirsten's point, we're not going to find a solution that is perfect because there are so many variables in terms of employer benefits, what people receive or don't receive. I mean, everyone just is very unique in their situation. And so completely agree, if we can find a solution that that benefits most, I think that would be a successful outcome, in my personal opinion, just because it is difficult to assess every individual situation. So thanks for that comment, Kirsten. Any other thoughts or comments? Looks like Tace.
Hi, sorry. I'm just curious on lines 7 and 8. Is there a reason it doesn't say state average weekly wage, or was that just an oversight that the state word is missing?
Lamar, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I believe that just might be an oversight, but also probably want to double check that ORS at the top of that just to see if there's already a acknowledgement. Um, but that is something that we can clarify moving forward for sure.
Thank you.
Matt?
So if you look at ORS 656.005, the definition of quote average weekly wage means the Oregon average weekly wage. That's why in the other references to average weekly wage, it says workers' average weekly wage. So when we use the term average weekly wage, it is defined under ORS already.
Got it.
Thank you.
Clarification.
Which, most important point, as a transactional attorney, let me tell you, it drives me up a wall that the statutes do not signify proper nouns or small caps for defined terms.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Mike?
Yeah, I just want to come back to something a little bit more fundamental, and firstly emphasize fully in agreement behind AFSCME on what they feel the course of action is here. But I also don't want to lose sight of the initial Mahoney Hall agreement that actually, on the one hand, set up MLAC as a institution, and on the other hand, said that they couldn't emphasize enough how important it was to the credibility of that the Oregon OSHA safety inspectors were increased 45%, I think it was. And just to put that in perspective, in terms of a per workforce representation, that number has dropped about 19% since 1990, which makes a deficit of, I think, like somewhere between 60 and 70 inspectors. So when we want to talk about, costs of the workers' comp system, I think I don't want to lose sight of what the people that put this together initially said was so drastically important to the whole operation.
Any other comments?
I think that's a great sort of perspective to echo. I know I've become a bit of a broken record saying that once the injury occurs, it's a zero-sum game, and it's going to be the insurer, the employer, the worker, or somebody else involved that's going to be paying for that. And the way that you escape that and truly create the win-win-win is ensure the injury doesn't happen in the first place. So I think that's an interesting way of framing that as well. And as much as we can sort of push that in the original understanding of the way that you address work comp issues is make them not happen through safe workplaces, I think is something we can all get on board with.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know we have additional data that Terry and team are collecting for us, but we are almost to the point where I think we have almost all the data points that we've requested. Would love to hear from this group if you feel like there's anything else we need to collect or any other data points that you would be that you're curious about or that you think would be helpful as we start moving towards the actual work. I think Scott and I were hoping that we would start moving towards actual work sessions in the next meeting or two. So really hoping to get the data collection and just the philosophical discussions taken care of now, so we all go in with that insight. Lamar, looks like you might have an idea.
And this is just my ignorance. So, do we currently collect data on dependents when doing intake for workers' comp right now?
Not on the 801. I don't know if Director West, do you have anything from your end?
We don't collect that information. And I don't know from an insurer side, when they're collecting wage information, if that's provided as part of what's, when the employer is providing the wage information. But it's not collected as part of the initial claim. It's not reported to the division.
Yeah, I know from the employer side, we're reporting, average wage for a certain period of time or that type of thing. But there's no, to my recollection, there's no discussion of tax or dependents or anything like that included in there. It's just purely the wage that the employee's been earning over a certain amount of time. And so that, to your exact point there, Lamar, that's what I'm struggling with. I'm kind of a numbers person. I'm trying to understand, okay, what are the impacts and what is everyone's reality, and then concluding that everyone is just in such a different situation in their life that it's really hard to put an exact figure on that, or tax rate or what have you. So I think back to Kirsten's point, we're going to try to absolutely make it better, but like anything, it probably will not be perfect. So
Thank you.
Co-chairs, we do know that we do have some data and we do not have some data. What was shared with us, we do not have data on people not reporting claims. And there's some other things I don't have in front of me. So what I could do for the next meeting on August 22nd is put together what we don't have and get that posted on the website. So everybody knows this is what we have is posted on the website, all the data, and then what we do not have. We also have a lot of people in the meeting that maybe don't share. If you would like to send me or the co-chairs information, mostly me, send it to me,
yeah,
please.
please send it to Terry.
Send it to Terry, please.
She's the trustworthy one here of getting it all into one spot.
Information that you would like to share, questions that you would like to ask, or anything, that would be great. We can add that to the questions maybe, or maybe data that you think that we might be missing, so that when we come together at the next meeting on August 22nd, questions to consider, policy discussion, anything along those lines that maybe, you feel that we might be missing, I think that would be a great idea.
I agree, Terry. Great thought.
Yeah, so that we have we know what we have, we know what we don't have, that we will not have because we just don't have the data. I think that would be a great idea. And then when we get together on the 22nd, we can, start having those discussions, like you said, Co-Chair Lewallen. So. And Strickland.
Sounds good.
Strickland, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I think the review of 705 was the last thing we had on the formal agenda, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Then anything else to be included and any public comment, those are the last two things.
Yeah, so opening it up to kind of those in the same vein. Again, if you have any ideas of information we should collect or request, and then any additional comments are welcome at this time.
I would just reiterate, I think, WCD, like, compliments to Administrator West, Terry, Baba, the research team has done a great job kind of compiling a lot of really relevant and helpful information to sort of get us a sort of range of heading to move forward with some information. I think, ASME's work on 705, I think is marvelous to kind of bring the issue forward. I know it's been on the work plan for a long time. I know there were discussions with, Dave Berenberg and Justino Viatoro and others that have been around the MLAC orbit for a long time about the sufficiency of benefits and that issue. I think that's helpful in having kind of, if we can get on the same page about a sort of general policy term, and then maybe debating over where those thresholds are and how to implement something to achieve where we can agree on policy together. There'll be additional data that we want. There'll be additional questions as a part of that kind of directional process that I think I see a lot of value in, like, taking a few steps forward, looking at some potential language, looking at some potential ideas, getting some more stakeholder engagement and involvement on that. Because then that'll sort of, direct the questions a little more. So instead of a, work comp wide, what can we look into and do that? We can sort of, narrow the scope and say, look, here's sort of the tunnel that we're looking at. Can we continue on in that direction? Are there, either research questions or issues that we have? Are there questions that we're not asking that we can get the data on? But not being entirely shackled by data either. I think some of this is going to be, as I think Kirsten mentioned, sort of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and can we make some progress in a sort of, predictable or controlled-ish manner where there's a sort of range of outcomes that are acceptable for the stakeholders and for the folks engaged in the process. And as much as we can kind of direct ourselves toward that as an end goal, I think is good. Keeping in mind that there's, a policy element to this that we're trying to accomplish. I know Stacy's brought up some of the policy concerns on the management side. I've brought up plenty of the concerns policy-wise on the labor. I think some of those intersect, and there's some overlay there, and where we can find kind of a little bit of that and some comfort from the other stakeholders, on the defense and plaintiff side, and then the insurer side too. Work comp is such a kind of odd, I don't know the word for a trifecta, but 5 parties involved, the quinfecta or whatever you want to call it, sort of unique situation where we need to juggle a lot of interests and concerns as we sort of take the policy points that we agree should drive the discussion. We'll disagree about how those get implemented, but I think kind of having some direction on that is helpful in moving forward. So again, my thanks to Lamar and Mike and others for engaging specifically in helping kind of keep driving this policy forward. So that's just, I know we're kind of in public comment, so that was just sort of a general thought that I've had. I think this was a great meeting, and we've had some great feedback on all sides.
I agree. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Well, it looks like you all are getting some good time back to your Friday afternoon. Hopefully you can go start your weekend a little early. Terry, as always, thank you for all your help and completely agree with Scott's sentiments. Thank you to all the other stakeholders that have engaged. We appreciate it. And I think we are almost done with the data collecting phase and let the real fun of the work begin. So thank you for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.